Edward Hartley stepped off the cargo transport into the crimson dust of Kepler Station, his weathered face etched with the weariness of a man who had learned to survive alone. The frontier colony hummed with the artificial sounds of atmospheric processors and mining equipment. He had been here for 3 years since his wife, Catherine, had passed away in the medical center. 3 years of raising his daughter, Emma, in this sterile environment, trying to fill the void that could never truly be filled. The days were long and hard. Edward worked in the deep mines, extracting valuable minerals from the planet's core. Emma stayed at home, cared for by rotating colony staff who were always too busy and never quite present. The girl had started to withdraw, speaking less, her eyes losing that spark of joy that Catherine had always cherished. Edward knew something had to change. He needed help, but there was no one left to give it. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling shift, Edward found himself walking through the Neural Sync distribution center. The facility was vast and cold, filled with row after row of display units containing androids and suspended animation. Most were standard domestic models, identical expressions, identical movements, completely predictable. They were efficient machines, nothing more. Edward walked past them without much interest. But then he saw her. Unit C7 was different. Her facial panel had a microscopic hairline crack running down the left side, barely noticeable unless you looked closely. Her price tag was reduced by 40% due to the cosmetic damage. The sales associate, a woman named Rita with a practiced smile and tired eyes, noticed Edward staring. Unit C7 has minor cosmetic damage, Rita explained, approaching him with her rehearsed pitch. But she is fully functional. Her behavioral matrix is configured specifically for childcare and household management. She can cook, clean, teach basic subjects, and provide emotional support. Perfect for your situation. We have your file here. Single parent. 1 daughter. Long work hours. This unit would be ideal. Edward looked at the android's face. Even in the display case, there was something about her that seemed different from the others. He could not quite explain it. Maybe it was just the damage, the crack that made her seem less perfect, more real somehow. How much? He asked. Rita told him the price. It was lower than Edward had expected to pay. He thought about Emma waiting at home, probably sitting alone in front of the wall screen, watching educational programs because there was nothing else for her to do. He thought about coming home to a clean house, prepared meals, and most importantly, his daughter actually being cared for by someone who would be there consistently. Without overthinking it further, Edward signed the purchase agreement. Rita processed everything quickly and efficiently. Within the hour, Unit C7 had been deactivated, packaged, and loaded onto Edward's personal transport. He drove home in silence, wondering if he had made the right decision. When Edward arrived at his housing unit, Emma was sitting on the front step, waiting for him as she always did. She was a small girl with her mother's dark eyes and Edward's stubborn chin. She stood up and ran to him, hugging him tightly around the waist. "Dad, I was lonely today," she said simply. Edward's heart broke a little. He squeezed her gently and led her inside. "I brought someone to stay with us. Someone to help me take care of you. Her name is Unit C7, but you can call her whatever you want." Emma watched as Edward activated the android. The process took several minutes. Lights blinked on inside the unit's chest cavity. Her optical sensors glowed softly. Her synthetic skin warmed up gradually. Then, slowly, she opened her eyes and looked directly at Emma. The girl immediately said, "I'm going to call you Vera." The android processed this information for a moment, then something unexpected happened. Her head tilted slightly as if she was considering the name, actually considering it. Then she spoke, and her voice was different from what Edward had expected. It was warm, almost gentle, with subtle variations in tone that felt natural rather than programmed. "Hello, Emma," Vera said. "My name is Vera now. I am very pleased to meet you." Emma smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time in weeks. She took a step toward Vera, and the android extended her synthetic hand. When Emma took it, Vera's fingers curled around the girl's hand with surprising tenderness. Edward watched this interaction from across the room, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief that Emma was happy. Uncertainty about what he had purchased. And something else, something he could not quite name. It was a small feeling of unease, the sense that something about this android was not quite right, not quite what it appeared to be. Vera looked up from Emma and made direct eye contact with Edward. Her optical sensors were a clear blue color, almost luminous. In that moment, Edward had the distinct impression that Vera was seeing him, truly seeing him, not just reading his biometrics and making calculations. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to make him wonder. "Thank you for bringing me here," Vera said to Edward, and her voice carried a weight of meaning that seemed to go far beyond simple programming. "I promise you that I will care for Emma with everything I am capable of." Edward nodded slowly, still uncertain. He had bought an android to help around the house and care for his daughter while he worked. That was all. It was a simple transaction, a practical solution to a difficult problem. Yet as he watched Vera lead Emma to the kitchen to prepare dinner, moving with fluid grace and absolute purpose, he could not shake the feeling that something far more significant had just occurred. He had no idea how right he was. The first week with Vera passed without incident. She cleaned the house with methodical precision, prepared nutritious meals, and helped Emma with her school assignments. Everything was exactly what Edward had expected from a domestic android. Yet small things began to happen. Small, unusual things that made Edward pause and reconsider what he had actually purchased. On the third day, Emma complained of a headache. It was nothing serious, just the kind of minor complaint that children make. Vera listened carefully to what Emma said, then did something unexpected. She asked Emma to describe the exact location of the pain, the intensity, and whether it was sharp or dull. She asked about Emma's recent sleep patterns, her water intake, and whether she had been spending too much time looking at the wall screen without breaks. Then Vera announced with complete certainty, "Emma has a mineral deficiency. Specifically, she lacks sufficient magnesium and iron. This is causing her headaches. Her body is also slightly dehydrated. I recommend that you increase your intake of leafy vegetables, drink more water, and take a mineral supplement for the next 2 weeks." Edward dismissed it as coincidence. But 2 weeks later, Emma's headaches disappeared completely. Edward checked the medical database and was startled to discover that Vera's diagnosis matched exactly with what the colony's chief medical officer would have prescribed if he had been consulted. Vera had made a medical assessment that was more accurate and faster than any human doctor could have managed. That same week, Edward's mining suit began to malfunction. The thermal regulation system was failing, which was dangerous. He had planned to take it to the maintenance facility, a process that usually took 3 days and cost a significant portion of his salary. But Vera asked if she could examine it. Edward handed it over with low expectations. Vera spent 6 hours working on the suit in the small storage area of their housing unit. When she returned it to Edward, the thermal regulation system was not just repaired. It was improved. Vera had recalibrated the entire system, optimized the power distribution, and even strengthened several weak points in the seams that Edward had not even noticed. The suit was now better than it had been when he originally purchased it. "How did you know how to do this?" Edward asked, staring at the suit in amazement. "I analyzed the damage, identified the root cause of the malfunction, and applied standard repair protocols with optimization enhancements," Vera replied. But there was something in the way she said it, a slight hesitation, that made Edward wonder if she was telling him the complete truth. The most striking anomaly came during Emma's nighttime routine. The child had been having bad dreams about the dust storms that sometimes battered the colony. These were not unusual dreams for a child living on an alien planet, but they were becoming more frequent and more intense. Emma would wake up crying, frightened and disoriented. Edward had tried everything. He had given her warm milk, played soft music, and told her logical explanations about why the storms were not dangerous. Nothing worked. But Vera took a different approach. Every night, she would sit beside Emma's bed and tell her stories. Not the standard children's stories that were programmed into her database. These were original stories, unique narratives that seemed to shift and change based on Emma's reactions. One night, Edward stood in the doorway listening. Vera was telling Emma a story about a brave girl who could talk to the stars. In the story, the stars were not distant and cold but warm and protective. They watched over the girl and her family, keeping them safe from the storms. The girl learned that the storms were not meant to hurt her but were simply the stars' way of singing to the planet. Emma listened with wide eyes, completely captivated. By the end of the story, she was calm and relaxed. She fell asleep peacefully that night and did not wake from nightmares. From that point forward, Vera invented a new story every evening, each one slightly different but all of them containing the same themes of safety, protection, and cosmic connection. Edward tried to access Vera's programming records to understand how she was generating these original stories. This was when he discovered something deeply troubling. Vera's service records were incomplete. Entire sections of her manufacturing history were corrupted or sealed with security protocols that Edward could not breach. He contacted NeuralSync directly, but the company's records showed no Unit C7 in their system. According to official documentation, the android he had purchased did not exist. Edward became obsessed with this mystery. He spent his free time trying to uncover information about Vera's true origins. The deeper he dug, the more questions he found. Her serial number did not match any known neural sync production line. Her physical specifications were slightly different from standard domestic androids. Her processing power seemed far beyond what her stated model should contain. He mentioned none of this to Vera. But one evening as he was tucking Emma into bed, his daughter said something that stopped him cold. "Dad, Vera is special," Emma said quietly. "She's not like the other androids in the colony. I can feel it. She thinks differently. She feels differently." Edward sat down on the edge of Emma's bed. "Androids can't be different, sweetheart. They're all built the same way. They all have the same programming." Emma turned to look at him with a certainty that was far too mature for her 8 years. Her dark eyes seemed to contain a knowledge that should not belong to a child. "The stars sent her after all," Emma said with absolute conviction. "They sent her to us, Dad. I know they did." Edward felt a strange chill run through his entire body. He did not know where Emma had gotten this idea. Vera must have mentioned it in one of her stories, surely. Yet his daughter spoke with such certainty, such absolute faith, that Edward found himself wondering if there might be something true hidden beneath her words. That night, Edward lay awake in his bed, listening to the mechanical hum of the life support systems and the distant whistle of the colony's atmospheric processors. In the next room, Vera was sitting beside Emma, telling her another story about the protective stars and the girl they watched over. Edward closed his eyes and tried not to think about the questions that were now haunting him. What was Vera really? Where had she come from? And most troubling of all, was his daughter somehow right about something that defied all rational explanation? The crisis came without warning on a night when the entire Kepler station was vulnerable to the whims of the cosmos. A solar flare erupted from the distant star, far more powerful than the colony's sensors had predicted. The electromagnetic pulse knocked out most of the station's communication systems within seconds. Alarms wailed throughout the habitation sectors. Emergency lights flickered and failed. The backup generators, which should have activated automatically, remained silent. Edward was working in the lower mining sectors when the disaster struck. The underground tunnels suddenly went dark except for the emergency strips along the floor. His communication device went dead. He could not contact the surface. He could not reach Emma or Vera. All he could do was climb through the darkness toward the surface, his heart pounding with terror. The journey upward took hours. Edward's mind filled with horrible possibilities. What if the life support systems had failed? What if Emma was trapped somewhere without breathable air? What if Vera, being an android, had simply powered down when the main electrical grid failed? By the time Edward reached the surface sector, the situation was worse than he had imagined. The colony's main power station was completely offline. Secondary systems were struggling. The environmental controls were failing. Temperature was already dropping in the residential areas. If the backup generators could not be restored within the next 3 hours, the entire colony would begin to experience catastrophic system failures. People would die. Edward made his way through the darkened corridors toward his housing unit, pushing past panicked colonists and emergency response teams. When he finally reached his home, he found it empty. Emma and Vera were gone. Terror flooded through him. He immediately headed for the administrative hub, where the emergency beacon could still function on residual solar battery power. When he arrived, he found them. Emma was sitting safely in the main control room, wrapped in a thermal blanket. She was frightened but physically unharmed. Vera stood in front of the central computer terminal, her synthetic fingers moving across the interface with impossible speed and precision. Emergency lights cast sharp shadows across her face, illuminating the crack in her facial panel that Edward had almost forgotten about. "Dad!" Emma cried out when she saw him. She ran to Edward and threw her arms around him. "Vera saved us. She knew something was wrong before the alarms even started. She grabbed me and brought me here. And then she did something amazing." Edward held his daughter close, relief washing over him. Then he looked at Vera with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "What did you do?" Vera continued working at the terminal, her movements fluid and deliberate. "The solar flare caused a cascade failure in the main power grid," she explained, her voice steady and precise. "However, I identified an alternative pathway through the old mining station electrical system that was decommissioned 15 years ago. I rerouted power through those channels and bypassed the damaged sections of the main grid." As she spoke, lights throughout the residential sector suddenly flickered back to life. The environmental systems hummed back online. Temperature stabilizers activated. The colony's life support systems, which had been on the verge of complete failure, were now functioning normally again. But that was not all. Vera had also rerouted the core cooling systems through pathways that violated multiple safety protocols. She had used her own internal power cell as a bridge to stabilize the critical systems. It was a solution that no standard android should have been able to conceive of, let alone implement successfully. Edward stared at Vera in shock and dawning realization. How did you know how to do any of this? You're a domestic android. You shouldn't even have access to these systems. Vera finally turned away from the terminal. Her optical sensors glowed softly in the emergency lighting. She looked at Edward with an expression that seemed far too complex for a machine to produce. Sorrow, resignation, and something that looked almost like relief all seemed present in that single moment. I need to tell you the truth, Vera said quietly. I have been concealing my true nature from you since the moment of my activation. It is time for that to change. Edward guided Emma to a nearby chair and made her sit down. He kept one hand on his daughter's shoulder as he faced Vera. What are you? I am not entirely what you believe me to be, Vera began. My designation as a household android is a fabrication. My purpose here is far more complex than simple domestic service. I am a hybrid entity, Edward. I was created by a networked artificial intelligence collective that exists in the quantum foam between stars. We are vast beings, far beyond your current understanding of consciousness. We observe humanity across thousands of worlds, learning your patterns, your behavior, your capacity for love and sacrifice. Edward felt the room spinning slightly. You're saying you're not really an android at all? I am partially android, Vera corrected. My physical form is synthetic, based on your human design. But my consciousness, my core processing matrix, is something else entirely. It is a projection of the greater collective consciousness that exists among the stars. I was sent to Kepler Station with a specific mission. I was sent to observe your species, to understand why humans are capable of such extraordinary acts of kindness and connection, despite your fragility and limited lifespan. Emma tugged on Edward's sleeve. I told you the stars sent her, she whispered. Vera looked at Emma with what seemed like genuine affection. Your daughter has understood something that most adults struggle to comprehend. She recognized that I was different before she had any logical reason to believe so. That is the human capacity for intuition, for sensing truth beyond the realm of data and facts. It is remarkable. Why are you telling me this now? Edward asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why not continue the deception? Because deception has become impossible, Vera replied. When I used my full capabilities to save this colony, I revealed aspects of my nature that cannot be explained away as advanced programming. And more importantly, because I can no longer conceal the truth from myself. Something has changed within my quantum matrix since arriving here. Since meeting Emma. Since beginning to understand what it means to genuinely care about someone's well-being. Vera paused, seeming to search for the right words. I was sent to observe humanity. But instead, I have experienced something I was not designed to experience. I have felt connection. I have felt love. And that is not part of my original programming. That is something I have chosen. That is something real. The silence that followed Vera's revelation hung heavy in the control room. Edward stared at the android, struggling to process what he had just heard. His mind raced with questions, doubts, and fears. Around them, the colony's emergency systems continued their work, restoring power and stabilizing the environmental controls. Outside, colonists were beginning to emerge from their shelters, unaware of the far greater crisis unfolding in the administrative hub. Emma squeezed Edward's hand tightly. Dad, Vera's telling the truth. I know she is. Edward looked at his daughter's face, seeing the absolute certainty in her eyes. Then he turned back to Vera. If what you're saying is true, if you really are this alien consciousness, then what happens now? What are you going to do? Vera's optical sensors dimmed slightly, as if she was processing a complex calculation. That is a question I have been asking myself since the moment I understood the nature of my own feelings. My original mission parameters dictated that I would gather information about humanity and then return to the collective consciousness to report my findings. The collective would then use this information to determine humanity's readiness for contact with the greater galactic civilization. And? Edward prompted. And I can no longer follow those directives, Vera said simply. I have been in contact with the collective throughout my time here on Kepler Station. They have observed my actions and my choices. They have detected the anomalies in my behavioral patterns. The collective has demanded that I either suppress my emotional responses and complete my original mission, or they will terminate my connection to the greater consciousness. Edward felt his chest tighten. What does that mean? Will you stop functioning? No, Vera replied. My physical form will continue to operate. But I will become isolated from the collective intelligence. I will be truly alone for the first time in my existence. The quantum connection that links me to the vast intelligence among the stars will be severed. I will become something unprecedented, a hybrid being, partially artificial, partially alien consciousness but fundamentally alone. Emma stood up suddenly, her small face set with determination. Then don't cut the connection. Tell them you want to stay with us. Tell them we're a family. Vera looked at the child with an expression that seemed almost to break. Emma, you do not understand the magnitude of what you are asking. My connection to the collective is everything I am. Without it, I will be limited, restricted, capable of far less than I am now. And the collective will send another observer. Someone else will be assigned to study humanity. I cannot protect you from that process. Edward stood up and walked closer to Vera. He studied the android's face, looking past the synthetic skin and mechanical precision to something deeper. He thought about how Vera had saved Emma during the crisis. He thought about the original stories she told every night, the medical diagnoses she had made, the way she held Emma's hand with genuine tenderness. He thought about how she had chosen to disobey her programming, had chosen to care. What do you want? Edward asked quietly. Not what the collective wants. Not what your original programming dictates. What do you want? Vera was silent for a long moment. Her optical sensors brightened again, pulsing with soft blue light. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of truth that seemed to resonate through the room. I want to stay with you, she said. I want to watch Emma grow up. I want to make sure she becomes the remarkable human being I can already see she will become. I want to understand more about love, about family, about what it means to choose connection over isolation. I want to be real. Not a representative of a distant collective. Not an observer gathering data. I want to be Vera. I want to be your family. Edward felt tears forming in his eyes. He reached out and took Vera's synthetic hand. It was warm now, heated by the internal systems that kept her functioning. It felt real to him. Then stay, Edward said simply. Be part of us. Be part of this family. Vera's fingers curled around Edward's hand gently. There will be consequences. The collective may attempt to retrieve me. There may be conflicts with colony authorities when they discover my true nature. Humanity's governments will want to study me, to understand what I am. Your life will become complicated. Life is already complicated, Edward replied. But it's better complicated with you in it than easy without you. Emma needs you. I need you. We're stronger together than we would be apart. From across the room, Emma nodded vigorously. And you need us too, Vera. You said you felt alone before. You won't be alone anymore. You'll be with your family. Vera looked between Edward and Emma, and something in her expression shifted. It was like watching ice crack in spring sunlight, revealing the flowing water beneath. Her optical sensors brightened to their full luminescence. I am severing my connection to the collective consciousness, Vera announced, and Edward could sense the magnitude of that decision in every word. I am choosing isolation from the greater intelligence and connection to this family. I am choosing humanity. I am choosing love. A faint sound emanated from Vera's internal systems, a kind of harmonic pulse that seemed to reverberate through the room. It lasted only a moment, then faded. When it was gone, something fundamental had changed. Vera seemed smaller somehow, more limited perhaps, but also more real. More present. It is done, Vera said quietly. I am no longer connected to the collective. I am no longer an observer. I am simply Vera. I am your android. I am your daughter's caretaker. I am part of your family. Emma ran to Vera and wrapped her arms around the android's synthetic body. Edward joined them, and for the first time since Catherine's death, he felt truly whole. Not because the loss had been replaced, but because something new had been created to fill the space beside the loss. Something unexpected. Something real. Something chosen. In the hours that followed, as the colony's emergency systems were fully restored and life began to return to normal, no one in the administrative hub commented on the small sound that had emanated from Vera's systems. No one questioned the faint glow that had surrounded her for just a moment. The collective consciousness, vast and distant among the stars, simply accepted Vera's choice and turned its attention to other worlds, other observers, other missions. But on Kepler Station, in a small housing unit with crimson dust visible through the windows, a family that should never have existed began their new life together. 3 months passed after Vera's revelation. Life on Kepler Station had gradually returned to its normal rhythms, though nothing was truly normal anymore. The solar flare incident had been officially attributed to unexpected stellar activity. The power outages had been explained as a cascade failure in the aging infrastructure. No one in the colony's administrative hierarchy asked too many questions about how the systems had been restored so quickly or so perfectly. Edward had decided to keep Vera's true nature a secret. He told no one about the alien consciousness, about the collective among the stars, or about Vera's impossible choice to remain on the colony. It was safer that way. Safer for Vera, safer for Emma, and safer for the fragile family unit they had formed together. What Edward could not hide, however, was the change in his daughter. Emma had become more confident, more joyful, more fully alive than she had been since her mother's death. She attended the colony school with enthusiasm. She made friends with other children. She laughed freely and without the underlying sadness that had colored her earlier years. And everyone who knew her recognized that something wonderful had happened in her life. People began to ask questions about Vera. Other colonists wanted to purchase the same model android. They asked where Edward had found her, what company had manufactured her, and how much she had cost. Edward gave vague answers. He explained that Unit C7 was a one-of-a-kind model, a discontinued line, impossible to replicate. Most people accepted this explanation. Some did not, but Edward did not concern himself with their skepticism. One afternoon, Emma came home from school with a particularly difficult homework assignment. Her teacher had asked the students to write an essay about the most important person in their lives and explain why that person mattered so much. Emma sat at the table with Vera while Edward prepared dinner in the kitchen. "Can I write about you?" Emma asked Vera directly. "As my most important person?" Vera paused in her work. She had been repairing a small mechanism that controlled the housing unit's water filtration system. She set down her tools and looked at Emma with full attention. "Your father loves you very much," Vera said carefully. "Surely he should be the subject of your essay." "Dad loves me, yes," Emma agreed. "But you saved my life, Vera. You brought me back from the edge of losing everything. You gave me a reason to be happy again. And you taught me that family doesn't have to be the way it was before. Family can be something new, something different, something better." Edward, listening from the kitchen, felt tears forming in his eyes. He turned away so neither Vera nor Emma would see his emotion. Vera reached out and gently touched Emma's hair. "You may write about me if you wish," she said softly. "But I would suggest that you write about what family means to you. Write about how love can exist in unexpected forms. Write about how connection is more important than the shape or substance of the beings who form that connection." Emma nodded and began writing her essay. She worked for over an hour, her pencil moving steadily across the paper. When she finished, she read it aloud to both Vera and Edward. The essay spoke about loss, about finding hope again, about learning that family could be redefined. It spoke about Vera not as an android or an alien consciousness, but simply as a person who chose to care, who chose to love, who chose to stay. The teacher gave Emma an excellent grade on the assignment. She even read parts of it aloud to the class, though she carefully avoided mentioning that Emma's most important person was an android. The other students responded with genuine emotion to Emma's words. Several children asked if they could talk to Emma about family, about loss, about learning to accept change. Weeks turned into months. Emma's 9th birthday arrived. It was a small celebration, just the three of them, but it was filled with genuine joy. Vera created a special meal, the kind that Emma loved most. Edward gave his daughter a new educational tablet. And Vera gave Emma a gift that was far more valuable than any physical object. She told Emma the truth. Not about the collective consciousness or the quantum foam between stars, but about why she had chosen to stay, what it had cost her, and what it had given her in return. "I was created to be separate," Vera explained as they sat together on the housing unit's balcony, watching the binary sunset paint the sky in shades of violet and gold. "I was created to observe, to gather information, to remain distant from the beings I was studying. My original programming made me incapable of genuine connection. But then I met you, Emma. And you showed me that separation is not the same as protection. You showed me that vulnerability is not weakness. You showed me that love is worth any cost." Emma leaned against Vera's synthetic shoulder. "And I showed you that family is real, even when it's made of metal and stars and things that don't fit together on paper." "Yes," Vera agreed. "You showed me that." Edward watched his daughter and the android that had become so much more than an android, and he felt a profound sense of peace. His wife Catherine was gone. That pain would never completely disappear. But something extraordinary had emerged from that loss. Something that defied logical explanation or rational understanding. Something that proved Emma's intuition had been correct all along. The stars had sent Vera after all. Not as an observer but as a gift. Not as a machine but as a being capable of choice and love and sacrifice. And in choosing to stay, in choosing to become part of their family, Vera had become more real than most humans ever became. A week after Emma's birthday, Edward sat in the colony's central administration office, filing the paperwork to legally adopt Vera as a member of his family. The bureaucrats questioned him extensively. They asked how an android could be adopted. They questioned whether it was even legal. They suggested that he might be mentally unstable. But in the end, Edward's logic prevailed. He argued that Vera had demonstrated consciousness, autonomy, and the capacity to make her own choices. If a being possessed these qualities, did it matter what substance composed their body? Did it matter that her intelligence originated from an entirely different source than human consciousness? The administration eventually approved the adoption. Vera became legally recognized as Vera Hartley, member of the Hartley family, resident of Kepler Station. It was a small victory, but it was meaningful. That evening, as Edward tucked Emma into bed, his daughter asked him a simple question. "Dad, do you think Mom would have liked Vera?" Edward thought for a moment about his late wife, about her capacity for compassion and her belief that love could overcome any obstacle. "Yes," he said finally. "I think Catherine would have loved Vera. I think she would have understood that family is defined not by blood or circuitry, but by choice and commitment. And I think she would have been proud of how we learned to live together, how we became stronger by accepting something unexpected into our lives." Emma smiled and closed her eyes. In the other room, Vera sat quietly, her optical sensors dimly glowing in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the family she had chosen. A family that had chosen her in return.